Thank God, today we're continuing our discussion on the first stage in the end times process, which is the period God has given to us Gentiles. In the previous 3 sessions, we've talked about the time God has given to Gentile believers, the time allotted for Gentile believers. Romans 11:25-26 says, "Until the full number of Gentiles has come in, then all Israel will be saved." So, up until the end times arrive, this is the time God has set aside for the Gentiles. Why did God set aside this period? Romans 11:11 says, Paul says, "Israel has stumbled. Is it meant to make them fall? Of course not. God never intended for the Israelites to be completely abandoned by Him or cut off from God. Absolutely not. On the contrary, because of their missteps, salvation has come to the Gentiles to stir them to desire it." So God gave Gentile believers a role to spark a sense of longing in the Israelites. Longing for what? Longing for salvation. Because it says here, salvation has come to the Gentiles. So it's meant to awaken that longing in them. Jealous of what? Exactly? Salvation. This salvation was originally intended only for Israel, or in other words, for the Israelites. They originally believed this salvation was exclusively for them, but to their surprise, there was an even larger group, a vast multitude of non-Israelite peoples. The salvation they experience is vastly different from what the Israelites have known, which can provoke jealousy among the Israelites, who consider themselves God's chosen people. Paul says it's meant to stir them to jealousy. To be stirred up means this jealousy probably also includes a sense of dissatisfaction. I'm just not satisfied. Why is your salvation different from mine? It's like provoking someone. Why is something that should be mine now yours? And what you know seems different from what I know. That gave me the motivation to seriously dig into and study the reasons behind it. I want to find the answer. So it made them dissatisfied, stirred up their jealousy, and made them indignant. The purpose was to get them to seriously return to studying the God of their ancestors. What exactly was said, and what kind of promises were made? So this is also something God has given to us, Gentile believers, the privilege of taking part in God's glorious moment at the end times, or you could say this is a calling entrusted to us. Because this means that during this time, what role you play, what identity you take on to walk with God and with His covenant people, how we can enter into this glorious identity together, and what does this garment represent? As we mentioned last time, first, God needs Gentile believers to comfort and encourage His people. Second, God needs Gentile believers to encourage and comfort the Israelites who have been afflicted by God, so they can see hope and not lose heart. Seeing hope so that they might have a change of heart. That's why there's jealousy. Why do you know, but I don't? So that He might turn back. The third is to stand watch for Jerusalem. This is what we're going to talk about today. Since we've discussed this before, we won't go into detail today. During this time God has given to Gentile believers, God expects Gentiles to help remove the barriers that keep Israel from accepting the gospel. Now we understand what are the barriers for Israel to accept the gospel, because we don't belong to their community. We need to understand where their challenges are. So, what are the main obstacles? First, both Judaism and Christianity are monotheistic faiths. They come from the same roots. Every people has their deeply ingrained and unshakable traditions, culture, logic, and philosophy. So when someone is accustomed to a certain way of life, with the traditions, culture, logic, and philosophy we just mentioned, these elements make up their lifestyle and also shape their social values and their understanding of the spiritual realm. Everyone has this, every culture and people group has it. So, when the gospel is presented to them, if it goes against their inherited culture, logic, or philosophy, or clashes with their understanding of the spiritual realm or their social values, they experience inner conflict. They experience cognitive dissonance. This is called a barrier to accepting the gospel. For the Israelites to accept Jesus as the Messiah, the conflict and barriers that come with this understanding are the greatest and most difficult among all peoples. Why is it the hardest for the Israelites? Let's think about that. It's like seeing two colors that are drastically different from each other. Isn't it really easy to tell them apart? This one's black, that one's white, this one's yellow, that one's blue. Because as soon as we see them, we can immediately tell there's a huge difference between the two. It's really easy to tell them apart. Yes means yes, no means no. Let's say today we're sharing the gospel with a Hindu. Hindus believe in over 300 million gods. Today we tell him, there's only one God. He is the Lord who created the heavens and the earth. It's not really a big obstacle for him, not really. It comes down to two different perspectives. One is believing in countless gods, the other is believing in just one God. So he needs to distinguish between these two beliefs. They are fundamentally different. He can understand this easily. I used to be a polytheist. There used to be countless gods, but not anymore. Or, for example, if we share the gospel with a Buddhist today, a Buddhist's perspective on life is centered on reincarnation. So when you share the gospel with a Buddhist, for him, he just needs to shift his view of reincarnation to the idea of eternal life. Isn't that right? That's not hard for him. I used to believe in reincarnation, but faith in Jesus isn't about reincarnation. Believing in Jesus means receiving eternal life. Just once is enough. For him, it's simply choosing a different way of thinking about faith. So be Hindus or Buddhists, accepting Jesus as the Christ. The main point of conflict is just having to give up polytheism, and the idea of reincarnation to embrace the logic of monotheism and eternal life. Such a conflict does exist, and it's actually quite obvious. It's clear to see what I'm choosing right now. I'm choosing to give up polytheism for monotheism. I'm choosing to give up reincarnation for eternal life. For them, it's simply a matter of these two choices. The conflict is definitely there, however, it's relatively easier. But for Jewish people, Christianity and the Old Testament they believe in, except for the ones we've memorized: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1 Samuel. Our order is different from theirs. Other than that, they're the same. In other words, Jews and Christians overlap in this area, so they start from the same foundation, but they develop different views on salvation. For a Jewish person, it's hard to distinguish. Do I have to change my perspective to accept yours? That's not easy. It's like a teacher in a classroom who has to take attendance before class. They have to call out, "Da Peng." Okay. Today, Ying Ying raised her hand. I would definitely know you're pretending, because I can always tell Da Peng is a guy about 5'7" tall. All right. Today it's someone different. It's easy for me to tell the difference. I know you're not real. But what if today there are twins in the classroom? One of the twins has to pretend to be the other one? You'd say the teacher would have a hard time telling them apart. Or maybe the other twin didn't show up today, and this one is filling in. He's the one answering you. The teacher would have trouble telling them apart. Unless the teacher is really familiar with both of them and has compared them side by side, then it would be obvious. This one's eyebrows are different, this one's ears are different. Where is the mole on this? Unless you've studied this in depth, otherwise you really won't know who's who. You can't tell them apart. So, when it comes to the obstacles that keep the Israelites from accepting the gospel, the first reason is because they share the same roots. That's why it's hard to tell the difference. Why do people with the same roots end up with different results? How can you expect them to know who's right and who's wrong? Secondly, what's another obstacle for them to accept the gospel? It's their Jewish traditions. They have deeply ingrained beliefs about the Messiah. Doesn't that make sense? It's been 3,000 years. They already have a deeply rooted perspective, especially for devout Jewish believers. Believing that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God, is a major conflict with the understanding of the Messiah they've been taught since childhood. Every family shares stories about certain people. These stories about those people, as we grow up, we naturally compare them when we hear them, don't we? Jewish people do the same thing. From the time they were growing up, they were taught what the Messiah was supposed to be like. So when Jesus was preaching the gospel on earth, Why was it that for ordinary people, for street vendors and laborers, there were no obstacles? They found it easy to accept that Jesus was the Christ, because they saw Jesus perform miracles and would think, if this isn't the Son of God, then who could it be? Because they weren't devout followers of Judaism or deeply learned scholars, they were fishermen or tax collectors. Just like when Jesus healed the man born blind on the Sabbath. This action, for those with deep spiritual insight, but for the Pharisees who were tightly bound to tradition. These Pharisees would feel that, as it says in John 9:16, this man is not from God, because he does not observe the Sabbath. They believed that breaking the Sabbath meant you couldn't be from God. Why is that? Because their understanding of the Messiah came from the law. So it could never be someone who violated the Sabbath, but for someone who, from the perspective of a blind man without much education, John 9:25 says, whether he is a sinner or not, I don't know. But one thing I do know. I was blind before, but now I can see. For this man who was healed, for a blind man who suddenly sees the light, what he sees is reality. He relies on what actually happened to understand who it was that healed him. He boldly mocks these highly educated people, saying, he opened my eyes, and yet you don't even know where he's from. Isn't that strange? We know that God doesn't listen to sinners. God only listens to those who worship him and do his will. Since the creation of the world, no one has ever heard of anyone opening the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. John 9:30-33. Because this man's eyes were blind from birth, and now he can see, that's an incredible change. Because the difference is so great. It's easy for him to tell. He can easily recognize that the one who healed him is from God. So when Jesus said to him, do you believe in the Son of God? He replied, well, who is the Son of God, so I can believe in him? For the blind man, it wasn't that he didn't believe in the Son of God. His question was, who is the Son of God? So when Jesus said, you have already seen him, and the one speaking with you now is him, the blind man immediately understood, because he used the simplest logic, get to know Jesus. He used the simplest contrast to confirm the person who was speaking. He wasn't lying. So it was easy for him to say, Lord, I believe. Then he worshiped Jesus. So, for someone without deeply rooted understanding of the Messiah concept, ordinary people, he could accept it. But for someone with this kind of experience, the more learned they are, the more experience they have, as classic teachers of the Scriptures, they put forward their own expert opinions. It's about their status and authority. They focus only on the rules. What matters to them is the standard passed down by our ancestors. Then they use that standard to judge what's happening now. So not only do they not believe that Jesus is the Son of God, they absolutely don't believe that Jesus received the authority and power to heal from God. There's only one reason for this. What's the reason? Because he doesn't keep the Sabbath.